Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and for today's Sunday sit down video, I'd like to talk about living card games, or LCGs. You probably, if you're watching this, you probably know what it is, but my understanding of it, I've only played a few of them, which I'll talk about that in the video here, but my understanding of a living card game is that it is a game where, A, you are buying decks or packs of cards, usually cards. Sometimes it can be dice and other things where you know exactly what's in the pack, so there's no randomization, there's no collectible element to it. B, there's some element of deck construction. You're not just buying packs and adding them to general components as you would with an expansion for another game. Um, and C, these packs and these new generally packs come out on a regular basis, and typically the definition I've heard is that they come out at least once a quarter, sometimes even just once a month, or every month they are released. That's my understanding of what an LCG is, and that's compared to like a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering, where some of those definitions do fit. There's deck construction, you're getting a regular release of new packs, but there's randomization and thus a collectible element to it. Some cards are more rare than others in Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And those other collectible games. So today is not a dissection of or a discussion of LCGs versus CCGs, collectible card games. Rather, I'm going to focus solely on living card games, which is a trademark term. I think they can also be called expandable card games, as the more generic untrademarked term. But I want to talk about them from a design discussion because I'm considering designing one for Stonemeyer Games, and just been thinking about a lot of different things and gathering feedback from different people about what they like or dislike about LCGs. Um, and for context, let me let you know. I'll tell you the ones that I've played. I've played Arkham Horror, the living card game, once. I probably have a video about it somewhere. I had a decent experience with it. It was the first game, I think, or the first session. It might even be a tutorial session. And I enjoyed it, but the theme didn't really rope me in. And there were elements that were consistent with a lot of other Cthulhu style games. Most notably, the skill checks. It is not the type of skill check that I like in games. However, I did like the bag building element of it, and I've heard that the story is very, very strong in Arkham Horror LCG, and it is a cooperative LCG. I think it's probably the highest rated one. We'll talk about more on that in a minute. The other one I've played is Marvel Champions. Played that one fairly recently once. I played as Iron Man. Had a good time. It was a little fiddly to me. And, like, I haven't been excited to return to it, which has surprised me a little bit because I love Marvel and it's been very highly rated. People seem to really be enjoying it. I love that people are enjoying it. It didn't draw me back in for a second play, but I had a good time, and that was despite me having a decent time the first time I played. I really liked the element of flipping your character over back and forth between their alter ego and their hero side. I thought that was really cool. And I'll talk about this more in detail, but I really liked the way they did deck construction in Marvel Champions, which was it was kind of a modular system where you're shuffling together a few different decks of cards or styles of cards, but you're not actually spending a lot of time deciding which cards should go in your deck. In fact, I don't think I made any of those decisions in my first play. There was maybe a recommended setup for it. I as a kid, I played Legend of the Five Rings a few times because I loved the look of it, the story of it. I love Japanese themes, and Japanese feudal fantasy is really up my alley. And but I haven't played it in a long, long time, and now it's been revamped and renewed by Fantasy Flight. And the thing that I really liked about it, I don't know if Fantasy Flight is still doing this, or the thing that I think is really cool about it, is the idea that certain tournaments of Legend of the Five Rings determined big story arcs, major story arcs in that impacted the different clans and the mechanisms in the game itself. And I think that's really cool that the meta experience impacted the overall story of the game. What else? I played Netrunner once, and enjoyed it for what it was. I love the asymmetry in the game. Again, I didn't return to it, and we'll talk about more about this in a second. I haven't ever actually returned to any of these LCGs. And I played Keyforge. Keyforge is probably my favorite on this list. I don't know if everyone would actually call Keyforge a living card game. especially since it doesn't quite meet the definition of knowing what's in the pack. In fact, you definitely don't know what's in the pack when you buy it, but it doesn't have a collectible element. I'll kind of include it in this category. I have really enjoyed Keyforge. Again, I haven't played it in a while, but I really did enjoy it. And I have played, what was the last one? I played, this is arguably not a collectible card game, but I have played Star Wars, what's the game where you're fighting with Star Wars miniatures? And you're basically, instead of buying a pack of cards, you're buying a specific miniature that you're adding to your fleet. It's not Armada, it's the other one, the one that came before that. Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game, whatever that is. I don't know if we'll call that an LCG. I won't go into it here because it is pretty different than these other LCGs. The other ones that I have not played are the Game of Thrones LCG, the Lord of the Rings LCG, Star Wars Destiny, Overpower versus there's a different one called Star Wars LCG, I think, Call of Cthulhu, Ashes, and Doomtown Reloaded. I haven't played any of those. And below, I will actually link to a video or a podcast that I recommend listening to if you're intrigued by this subject, the style of game, from Covenant, the Covenant cast. They're guys that specialize in LCGs, really. This is their specialty. And they're talking about, in this specific podcast, why they think Marvel Champions is kind of the epitome of a living card game. It's what they want every living card game to pretty much be. Anyway, that long introduction of what various examples of LCGs, and maybe that'll trigger some memories in you of LCGs that you've played in the past. Let's talk about different elements of it. And I'll jump around here. My thoughts are in no particular order here. One is price. I'm intrigued by, I know this is less of a design discussion point rather than a publishing point, but I'm intrigued by the price of LCGs, both the price to get into the game, to buy that core box, versus to buy a pack, one of the expandable packs. And one ideal price I've heard thrown around is $20. That $20 is a good price for a pack, as long as there's a substantial number of cards in that pack, or the content in it is substantial. I've heard that the core box should then be between $20 and $40. And that price range, it does impact the design, because then you're kind of designing around that price point of letting people get in the door into the game very easily, because that price will probably be discounted. Even at $40, that could be discounted down to like $29 on an online retailer's website. But that, I'm very curious about the ideal price of the expandable pack. $20 actually seemed a little high to me when I heard that number. To me, I think somewhere more in like the 12 to 15 range might be a little bit better. And with Keyforge, you can put down $10 and immediately have a pack that you can play with. But at the same time, for Keyforge, these cards probably cost around 20 cents to make. The pack that they come in may cost actually almost the same amount as the cards themselves. So you're paying a lot for the design and the art and the ingenuity of Keyforge, and not necessarily the components when you're paying that $10. That's a great return on investment for Fantasy Flight. So I'm curious about what you think about price. A lot of this, I'm going to throw all of this back at you. I genuinely want to hear what you think about LCGs, what you like, what you dislike, the experiences that you've had with them. There's the idea of the release schedule. How often is too often? And how long should that schedule even go? So is one pack a month, one new pack a month, too much? That seems like a lot to me, to be getting a new pack every month. I love what Covenant does. Covenant's specialty is that you can subscribe to a game, and then every time a new thing comes out for that living card game, they'll send it to you. So you don't have to worry about kind of chasing it down. They will take care of that for you, and I really like that model. But how much is too much? Is once a month seems like a lot. Once a quarter, from a design perspective, still seems like a lot. I'd have to, like, if I was to design a living card game, I would have to plan several booster packs or several expandable packs in advance so that we can get ahead on that production timeline. That's something to think about it from a publishing perspective. But I'm curious what you think. How much is too much and how much is too little from your perspective as a player. There's also, this is a big one, cooperative versus competitive. So my perception of LCGs is that the competitive environment is very different than the cooperative environment. And some of the cooperative LCGs are the ones that seem to be doing the best. Arkham Horror, Lord of the Rings, and Marvel Champions. They seem to have the most longevity out of any of these games. Although Keyforge, while arguably not an LCG, seems to also be doing very well, or has done very well over the last couple of years. And this is a competitive game, not a cooperative game. But I think the main thing, actually, let's stop calling this an LCG, because there is no even deck construction of this. It doesn't meet even 2 points of my description. So I won't refer to Keyforge again. But yeah, cooperative versus competitive. So from what I heard from a few friends when I was talking about this, they love the cooperative element because they don't feel like they have to get like the same factions as somebody else to stay competitive. They don't have to buy a ton of cards to be competitive. You're working together with other players within your group. If you have a group that are going to play this game on any bit of a regular basis, you don't need any duplicates of anything. Like if you play Marvel Champions, you're not going to have more than one Iron Man. You're going to have one Iron Man in play. So you don't need to buy more than one Iron Man. At least that's how I think the game works. And that makes sense thematically too. In the game that I'm thinking about designing around this LCG system, it wouldn't make sense for more than one player to have the same faction or the same character. That doesn't make sense, thematically at least. Competitive, I think, is the very different models of games. Sometimes for certain games, competitive is just better for the mechanisms of the game. And so is there a way, I'm wondering, that a competitive game could work as an LCG? For example, what if you used... a lot of it comes down to deck construction, in my opinion. For cooperative LCG, you having all the same cards as someone else doesn't matter. And so you can do something cool like in Marvel Champions, where there's a modular shuffle building system where you take 3 different decks of cards and you shuffle them together. You don't have to think about the cards themselves, the specific individual cards. You don't have to look at an overwhelming mass of cards that you've collected over time. You just have those different stacks and you shuffle them together, kind of like Smash Up. And that's really cool. I really, really like that idea. And I wonder if that could transfer over to competitive, and especially competitive if it isn't competitive, geared towards tournament play, and you could just shuffle them together. Now, I've kind of jumped ahead for a few of those things. So tournament play, let's talk about that. Does an LCG need to have tournament play? If it is competitive, do you need to have tournaments to support it? Or can it just be its own thing? Like, there are plenty of games, so many board games that have expansions that are not tournament driven, but they're still competitive. Probably most of the games that you play are competitive, just in general. But I highly doubt that most people actually go to tournaments on a regular basis. We play casually, we play with our friends, and we try to win, but we're not going to tournaments. So could a competitive LCG work that isn't tournament driven? Are tournaments a key part of an LCG's success, or the driver why people play competitive LCGs? I mentioned deck construction. So this is actually a major reason, and one of the things I want to talk about, why I haven't really gotten into an LCG. And a big part of it is I don't want to spend time constructing a deck. I just want to sit down and play a game. I want the choices to happen during the experience of playing the game. Even if it's Magic, like a Magic draft. To me, after you draft Magic and you construct the deck, that is all part of playing the game. That's part of the experience. You're not doing that in advance. That's different than the constructed version of Magic, where you are constructing a deck in advance, which I used to do many, many years ago. I no longer do that. I don't want to spend time doing that. I want to spend my creative energy doing other things. So I like that idea I like the idea, especially in Marvel Champions, of minimal deck construction. You just sit down at the table and you say, okay, I want that deck, this deck. Let's shuffle them together, and I want to start playing right there. I really like that model. But I'm curious, you might be different. You might really get a lot of joy out of that deck construction element. I've also heard that, like I mentioned, there can be an overwhelming number of cards, even in cooperative play. So with like the Lord of the Rings card game, there are so many cards out there that I think that it can be tough to keep track of all of them. And so if you're building a deck with Lord of the Rings, one of the things I've heard that it can just be overwhelming. There's so many cards to choose from. So I hear that too. One thing I heard that was really, really cool was that from a store owner, that they love the idea that that they could be hanging out at a game store or game cafe, and a friend can show up, or whatever the circumstance is, basically that they could buy a new expandable pack at that moment and put that pack in the game and start playing. That's one of the cool things. I'm going to mention Keyforge again. That's one of the cool things about Keyforge, and they mentioned it in reference to Marvel Champions, that they could be playing Marvel Champions or about to play, and someone could say, I want to play as whatever, a Hulk. No, not Hulk. I think the Thor pack just came out. I want to play as Thor. They could just buy the Thor pack and immediately get in the game as Thor. They mentioned that they really like that. I don't know how often that actually happens. I'm curious if you've ever had that experience at a game store where you've said, I want to join in this game right now, but I want to bring my own flavor to it, and you buy something to add to the game. I don't know if that actually happens all that often, but I like the spirit of it. That does sound cool to me. Here's a big one. So one of the major reasons that I haven't gotten into an LCG is that it feels like a long-term commitment without an end in sight. And I like to play a pretty wide variety of games. There are games that I love that I end up playing multiple times, but I don't always know which of those games I am going to get into that way until I actually play them once. And in LCG, it seems like a weird barrier to entry that I feel like if I am going to start playing one, that there's kind of this long-term commitment to it, even though I don't know if that's actually true at all, but it feels that way. And a big part of it for me is that I don't know if there's an end in sight. Like I liked when Time Stories did the thing where with Time Stories they said, okay, we have a story that we're telling over multiple modules, and at the end of I think the 8th module, the story's going to end. There's an end in sight here. You're not going to have to play this game forever to know the end of the story. Whether or not that end was actually worth it is up to you. I enjoyed Time Stories throughout. But I like the Time Stories said from fairly early on that there's an end to this. And that element I am really intrigued by for the LCG model. Could you go into an LCG? Could you enter the market with a new LCG or expandable card game and say, we're going to put out a new pack every 3 months for the next 3 years, and that'll be it. Our story will be complete after that. Your experience will be complete. There's an end in sight, and this is what it is. To say that plan up front. That is very appealing to me, but I'm very curious about if that would be appealing to you. What else? I have a few other points here. Oh, solo versus multiplayer, and this kind of ties back into cooperative versus competitive. A lot of the very positive reviews I've heard about some of these games, Arkham Horror LCG, Lord of the Rings, Marvel Champions, is that they can be played solo, that you don't even need someone else to play with you because they're cooperative, because it's you against the world. And again, I wonder if that could be, like you've seen in some of our games, the Automa system works in competitive games very well. But I wonder if how crucial that is to your experience or people's experiences of playing LCGs. If it's that much better if you have the solo option to play. And I think tied into that a little bit is the idea of ever accumulating rules. A friend mentioned this in reference to the Lord of the Rings game, that the sheer number of rules in the game, while it's nice to add a new rule in a bite-sized increment. So you add a new pack, there are a few new rules you learn, and you can play that starts to accumulate and add up over time, and it can be too much. And so a few of the things they mentioned were maybe that whenever you have a new pack, that you include the previous rules too, in the new rule book, or you have some way of collecting all the rules together in a way that players can easily reference them. I don't know if there's a great solution for that. Like even with expansions of our games, I don't reprint the rules from the previous games. You're left with a bunch of different rule books in front of you, and I can see how that would be overwhelming when you're dealing with a dozen mini rule books versus 2 or 3 new rule books. That's manageable. A dozen is a lot harder to manage and look up different things. So have you found that to be a frustration for you, and is there a way around that? Overall, despite all these questions, I remain intrigued by this system. I love what Covenant is doing with their subscription service. I think that's really cool. And I love the ability to tell an ongoing story on a consistent basis where people are excited about what's going to happen next, and where the content they're adding is so small and manageable. Not small, I would say manageable, that they do get it to the table right away. I love anything that any type of expansion that is so easy to add to the game that it makes you excited to get the game back to the table, and that you know you're actually going to get it to the table quickly because it was so easy to learn. I love that idea of expandability in any game. And with a living card game, it's a little bit more consistent, a little more regular, and I'm really intrigued by that. So yeah, I mean, those are my rambling thoughts. I'm very curious about elements that I haven't even thought of. I want to hear what your favorite LCG experiences are and why you enjoy them so much. And I want to hear your thoughts about these different debates, one thing versus another. What do you enjoy the most? And especially, I must admit that I am leaning towards a competitive LCG, which I know goes against some of the things that people have said about cooperative LCG. But for the specific theme that I'm looking at, competitive works better than cooperative. And so I want to see what you would like to see, given what you've seen from cooperative LCGs, what really works in them, what elements could be pulled over to a competitive LCG and still work really well in that format. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. I want to learn from you. Thanks.